So, welcome everyone to this evening's meetup. So, first of all, I would like to, especially for the people online, we want to thank Christian for creating our awesome countdown animation. I don't know if the people in person saw it, but that was super cool. And as you can see on the screen, this will be our agenda tonight. And although we're a little bit delayed, but yeah, we're still gonna be doing what we plan to do. So, first of all, I also want to remind everyone that we'll be recording the workshop session. If you don't want to be recorded, please turn off your camera and change your name to keep your anonymity. And if you're not already familiar with our PyLadies organization, we're a global organization which aim to provide a friendly support network for women and a bridge to the larger Python world as well. And anyone with an interest in Python is encouraged to participate. And thank you guys for being here tonight. So first of all, I would like to read through the code of conduct for with you guys as well, so we all know that we're on the same page. So we believe knowledge is for all, and at the same time, our events aim primarily to empower women in the tech community. By attending one of our events, online and in real life, you also agree to our code of conduct that PyLadies is dedicated to provide a respectful, harassment-free community for everyone. We do not tolerate harassment or bullying of any community member in any form. So anyone who agree with that, stay. Who doesn't, like, it's okay. Move on. We welcome folks to join us, and you can join our Slack channel, and it's a PyLadies, and then we have Berlin chapter and also chapters for other cities as well, in case you're moving or traveling and you don't wanna miss out. And we usually have more monthly meetups, but summer is coming and people are traveling and stuff like that. So we currently have a Streamlit workshop planned for the next one. And unfortunately, the date is not decided yet, but it will be held at UP 42. So go on our meetup page and then you'll see the date in probably the near future. Yeah. We also want to bring you people to the attention of PyCon Bratislava. Forgive my pronunciation. So they're doing their call for a proposal, and the deadline will be actually in a few days. So hurry up and turn your proposal in. And we will also share a feedback link at the end in the Zoom chat. So we have been hardworking to revamp our PyLadies presence as well as our global leadership. Why? Because we want to enable people to better run our chapters, not only locally, but globally. And our intent is to bring together all of our local chapters to help us collaborate, to share ideas, and also start new PyLadies global chapters elsewhere and Council, which will be responsible for overseeing the global PyLadies community. But to do this, we need your help. We want to engage with our PyLadies members, and PyLadies member can register to become a basic member or voting member and shape our global community. And last but not least, let's welcome our first speaker, Doreen, who's our beloved PyLady, and she's also a data scientist at Opinary, and she will give us a non-code power talk to introduce us to our lovely host, Opinary. Welcome, Doreen.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for the nice introduction and the welcome. And give me 1 second to kind of switch this around and find my slides. All right. Thank you for being here. We have the first ever, I think, PyLadies Berlin hybrid meetup in this office from Opinary, my work. What we do is we engage readers by asking the right questions. So what we do is we are integrated into a bunch of different German newspapers, also international, and we ask these questions. And if you read the German newspapers, you might have seen this already somewhere. And here you can see a nice animation very pretty. And the goal is to integrate polls in a way that it fits contextually. So we want to have car questions in car articles and questions about Angela Merkel in Angela Merkel articles. And that's kind of my job as well. So I try to get the algorithm to match these two together. And this is how we do it, more or less, in a very simplified way. So we identify articles via natural language processing, and then we have an article. So let's say you're on Spiegel, and you read an article about the speed limit on the German Autobahn, and if it's good or bad, and pros and cons. And then we get this article, we crawl it, and then we transfer it into a bunch of numbers. And then we calculate similarities between this article and then the poll. And then we can say, okay, we have a poll that has something to do with the speed limit, and we're going to show it. So that's pretty straightforward, I would say. And since we ask questions, I have some insights for you. The first one is, which I found a little bit interesting. We asked people, how concerned are you about being infected with COVID? And here you have like from October 20 to March 2022. And then you can see like in the beginning, everybody was quite worried, even though the numbers were super low and like we had incidents of like, I don't know, 1. And then about 50% of the people say, yeah, I'm actually quite worried. And then this kept kind of going until January like 21. And then like summer of 21, everybody was a little bit less worried and everybody was fine and summer was great. And then the numbers rose so much during winter and then people got more concerned again. And then actually what I find very interesting in the slide is that even though the numbers kept rising in like March, people weren't that worried anymore. So people actually didn't care anymore, a little bit like maybe now. Then we have a question, will you use the €9 ticket? And here we have it. I don't know if you can read this from more or less. Okay. So the first one is from RTL. And then there, actually like 80% of the people say, yeah, I'm actually going to use that. And then on the bottom slide, you can see NTV, where only like 42 people say, oh, we'll use it. And the rest just uses their cars, I guess. And then Tagesspiegel and GMX and FAZ are kind of in the middle of this whole slide. And then make this. So, do you think Boris Johnson should resign? Who's for yes? So a lot of people are for yes. A lot of our people are for yes too. Can you find real relationships on Tinder? Who says yes? No one, basically. No, like 3 people. But 70% apparently said yes. So people are very optimistic on this question. Who should succeed the Queen? Charles or William? Neither? We only had 2 options, and people said actually William in this case. Do you think Trump will run again in 2024? Yeah. 57% have said yes on this. All right. So opiniory in numbers, what we do is we ask 65K questions a month, roughly, on over 500 publishers. So we also have like tiny publishers and different sites and everything. But I think it's actually quite impressive. And we also integrate in over 1 million articles a month. Unique articles, just want to say. And thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to have the first hybrid meetup in the Opiniory office. And just if you're interested, we're also hiring. Also Python engineers. Thank you. And now we're gonna have the next in-person talk, which I'm very excited about. Let me just try to find my mouse and then.
In the meantime, I'll introduce you guys to our next speaker, Uku, and she's a software engineer at Odarbird, and today she's going to talk about dependency tools for Python, and let's welcome her.
Great. Sorry. I'll have this in a second.
Hi everyone. Today I'm going to talk about the dependency management in Python, and this is my first talk ever. And I'm really not good at public speaking, so you'll see me catching my breath a couple of times. Sorry about that. Yeah. So I am Öykü Gümüş, and you can see my name has a lot of umlauts. So this is a reminder of you to check your Unicode errors. I'm a software engineer at Orderbird, and Orderbird is a PS Solutions software company in Germany, but we have clients throughout Europe. And you probably used one of our products if you go to a local restaurant in Berlin or a cafe. And I've been in quite a lot of volunteer events so far, so I hope to see you in any other event. Okay, sorry. So I have three main goals for you to learn or for you to understand from this presentation. And the first one is the importance of the determinism, and the second one is the importance of your dependency manager and uncertainties in Python dependency management ecosystem. And I tried to kept my presentation beginner friendly, so I just introduced a small introduction. Okay, so we're talking about dependency management, but what is dependency? Dependency is in software is a library or package that is reused in a new place of software. For example, if you're writing a web app with Python, you might be using Django, but you did not wrote the Django yourself. You're just reusing it. So Django is your dependency. But what is dependency management? Dependency management is a technique for identifying, resolving, and patching dependencies in applications code base. And it is really serious matter, but it's really underrated. So let's see why is it important. First, okay, so outdated dependencies can impact your application in different ways, such as security, because if you don't update, some libraries have known vulnerabilities, so your application is exposed. And performance improvements. Let's say that you didn't update your libraries, and there's a new feature released, a new performance improvement, and you're missing out. And the last one is quality assurance. To keep things smooth, you should be updating your libraries because you might have some conflicts once in a while, or circular dependencies, or you just want to clean your unused libraries, unused codes. And what is dependency resolution? Sorry. The process of figuring out which exact set of dependencies is needed for a given requirement. For example, you have your app called My App, and you're using Django and requests, and you're using these versions. And Django 3.0.0 version is using requests 2.7.3. I'm just making up these numbers. It's not for accurate. And request library is using a charted library. There are a lot of versions. And for example, you might want to use request library in a different version, but Django wants in a different version. So you have to figure out a way to understand your dependency graph. And I'm going to talk about transitive dependencies quite a lot in this presentation. So what is it? It is a dependency of your direct dependency. In this graph, Django and request is your direct dependencies. You're using them, and Django is using requests. The request is Django's dependency, and the request is using charted, but you're not using charted directly, so charted is your transitive dependency of your dependency. Okay, so what are my options for a dependency management tool? I'm going to talk about pip, pipenv, poetry, and PDM. Of course, you have more options, but for now, I will just keep one of those. And I don't know if you've seen this comic, and I don't know if you can read it from there. You can read it? Oh, okay. So it's basically like this. We have some standard, X amount of standard. Someone says that, okay, this doesn't solve my requirements. I need another one. Everybody will use it. And at the end, we will have X plus 1 standards. So it's always the same. It's always a mess. And we know that dependency solving, this dependency resolution is hard topic. It's not easy, but we are getting better at it. And there's a really nice article, if you want to read, written by these lovely people. But in Python ecosystem, this is a bit more like way behind the other languages ecosystem. For example, JavaScript uses npm, and it has like more features than what we have in Python. It's more standardized, and we have a lot of issues with Python, and you'll see why in a second. Okay, so before moving forward, I will talk about our experience in my company, in Orderbird, because I did a very similar presentation 2 years ago using the same templates and everything, and it changed really important stuff in my company. So while doing so, I hope you can also reflect on your experiences as well. What we were using and why we had some problems. We were using pip. And with pip, it comes as a built-in package manager with Python. It's quite popular, get regular updates, and it's very simple. You can just use pip install, and you can even install pip using pip. And as cons, it's just too simple. But this is a really, really heavy cons. And what I mean by too simple, I will explain this in 3 points. Okay, so first is the non-deterministic installation versus the burden of the transitive dependencies. So when it comes to using pip, you have one option. You have two options, sorry, to use pip freeze or not. So pip freeze is actually writing packages to, and versions installed in your environment in the requirements.txt file. And if you use pip freeze, sorry, if you don't use it, you will get non-deterministic installations. And if you use it, you will have the burden of managing transitive dependencies. What I mean by non-deterministic deployments, non-deterministic installations. For example, let's have this requirements.txt file that is using Django 1.11.29 and Django Redis, but that doesn't matter. But anyway, your Django is based, requires also a request library. Django says that I need requests like above 2.2.1 version. And at that point, there's only 2.2.1. So one installation, you get this version. But next day, there's a new version came up, and then you installed this, but you didn't even know. Maybe there's a breaking change. Of course, it's a minor change. Maybe there's not breaking anything, but still you didn't know this. You didn't have control over this. So non-deterministic deployments are quite dangerous. And why? Because it means differences with the code we shipped yesterday and the code that we ship today. And with too many transitive dependencies, there is no way to guess that which one is going to be the next one that breaks the production. And we might even have the conflicts in the transitive dependencies. So I find this quite dangerous, and I don't want to roll this dice. Okay, what we had in Orderbird. We had in our requirements.txt file, we didn't run pip freeze. We had 103 packages. I run the pip freeze, and I realized we have now 207 packages. So 104 packages were just, we didn't know. We didn't know the versions of them, so we were getting non-deterministic installations. Maybe that wasn't a big deal at that point, but we don't know when it will be a big deal. And what I mean by burden of managing transitive dependencies, if not running pip freeze causes me non-deterministic installations, why not just I can't run pip freeze? Because then you will have to manage all of the dependencies, all of your transitive dependencies. For example, you used pip freeze and you use Django. Django uses request library. The request library uses PyTest. PyTest uses setup tools, and you know the idea. So we don't know, actually, these ones. You can't control them. It's fine. But you have to actually kind of control the versioning of these values. And you might have to do some kind of math on there. because keep in mind that you will have at least twice or 3 times more transitive dependencies than your direct dependencies. And I don't want to get into calculating all of them. I don't want to deal with them. It shouldn't be my job. Okay, so we understood the first one. What about the second? No dependency type support. What do I mean by dependency type support? Again, our requirements file at Audibert, we had 103 packages. And then we realized some of the libraries we're not using on production, like IPDB as a debugging tool and Django debug toolbar. And some Flake 8, like the formatting library and isort, we don't need those in production. So what we did, we just turned our requirements.txt file to requirements folder, and we used local txt. Okay, install these libraries only for local development, and have another production.txt file for only to install production, and base.txt file to have both. But I mean, this is very manual. There should be another way. And the third one is no automatic package integrity. What do I mean by package integrity? Is that, let's say, go with Django. We say pip install Django 1.11.29. And Django goes to PyPy, Python package index, and installs the right tag. But tomorrow, you might also see another tag with the same tag, but with different commit, with a different commit value. At the end, humans are using it, so there might be some changes, or it might not be for Django, but for any other library, some other people just shift the tag with a different commit. So now, if you run the same code again, you will get this one, not the first one, but you don't know it. So there is, of course, a way to provide package integrity, but requires manual work of developers for each library that is written in the requirements file or folder. So again, a lot of work. So this is a summary of pip and summary of why we had to change it. As you can see, too simple con is quite a big con for us, at least. Okay, so what was the solution for the mentioned problems? We want a tool that does it all, a dependency manager that delivers a good dependency resolver, a deterministic deployment without a choice, no dependency hell, of course, care only our direct dependencies, dependency type support, on, for example, dev type dependencies or production dependencies, package integrity without manual work, and a standardized approach for dependency installation. Sorry. Okay, so what we needed was log file. Log file logs the all versions for the entire dependency tree and contains the exact versions of all packages, including all of your transitive dependencies, and enables deterministic builds. And it also has a place to contain library hashes, so you will have package integrity. And it's also care only for the direct dependencies, so you will have no dependency hell. So this sounds really great. But of course, remember, do not touch the log file manually. You have to do it from the tool that you're using. Okay, what are alternatives? So options to provide the desired behaviors. The first option was pipenv, created by Kenneth Race, and it's written as Python dev workflow for humans. And even on now, you can see it on PyPy. It says that it's a recommended tool, so everybody thought that that is an official tool, so everybody started using it when it first came out. But since everybody's using it, a lot of problems were realized. So now I'm going to mention some of them. But let's see. Okay, so one thing to mention here: just because it's recommended, it's not an official tool, so you can still choose another package manager. So, okay, let's see an example workflow. When you say pip install Django, it automatically creates a virtual environment or uses your virtual environment. Writes the pip file, which lists Django as a dependency. This is your new requirements.txt file. Installs Django using pip. So pipenv is actually a wrapper around pip. Proceeds to write pipfile.log, which stores the exact versions and source file hash of each package installed. That's so far so great, but let's look at the pros and cons. So as pros, you have your new you have your new automatic way to set up your virtual environment and has a security check feature. Solves some problems with pip. These are nice. But as cons, it gets historically infrequent updates. When I did the presentation to my company, I did it in 2020. It was quite dead back in the day, but I checked, and as of 2022, they're really getting better, almost like one release in every month. So maybe this is not quite up to date yet. And the second one is erratic dependencies resolution. There were a lot of famous examples on internet. For example, Oslo UTIS libraries, people were saying that the right version couldn't be found, but I checked, now it's getting better. They're fixing it. And buggy caching system. This is quite funny because it takes longer to install using cache in pipenv. And also pipenv log command does not capture the dependencies of Python wheels. So you have one less library that is causing deterministic behavior. So one library that is causing deterministic behavior, sorry. And in general, it's slow because it's using pip in the back. And its use for development doesn't allow you to publish your package. Of course, you can still publish your package if you want to, but you have to use a setup py file. Yeah, if I'm not wrong, you can't just use pipenv. You have to use something else. So what should we use? I said to my company, and I said poetry. Why? It's created by Sebastian Austas. Sorry for my pronunciation. An example workflow would be poetry install Django, and similar to pipenv, it automatically creates a virtual environment somewhere in the home directory. It writes a PyProject TOML file, which lists as Django as a dependency, installs Django, and proceeds to write poetry log, which stores the exact versions and source file hash of each package installs, like pipenv. And on the second step here, writes PyProject TOML file, is actually following pep 518, which is gathering for all configuration in one file called PyProject TOML. So this is a bit better than pipenv. But okay, so what is pros and cons about poetry? Because everything has a cons, of course. So as a pros, better dependency resolution, better than pipenv. It's faster than pipenv, and it's following PEP 518, and it is deterministic deployments without a choice and without deployment dependency hell. And it has frequent releases, and it's a packaging tool, so you don't have to use another thing to publish your packages if you want to. And as cons, some problems with dependency resolver. So maybe you see that dependency resolver is on both pros and cons, because it's not easy. Dependency resolution is definitely not easy. Okay, so maybe you can see here, for example, I realized one big problem, poetry, saying that we are getting a dependency loop for Ozrecord library. But the good thing is they're working on it. So an example, PyProject TOML file. You have your production dependencies. You have your dev dependencies here. And how to migrate to poetry. So, okay, I convinced you. I convinced my company how to do it. You say poetry init, and then it prompts you to answer some general questions like what is the name of the project, what is the authors, who are the authors, sorry. Ask your direct and prod and dev dependencies, and then generates a poetry log file. And when you say poetry install, it checks for poetry.log file. And if it doesn't exist, it installs the latest or the specified version, and it creates the log file. And if the poetry log file exists, it installs the dependencies with the exact versions written on the log file. So, and the log file doesn't change. And there's a funny thing about pipenv and poetry. So this is the workflow that you get with poetry install. But if you say pipenv install, it installs the dependencies from the pip file, not from the log file, and updates the log file, which is a kind of a bad thing. And new versions might change So this is, for me, non-deterministic behavior and a bit inconsistency between developers. So you have to use pipenv sync instead of pipenv install, which is kind of a similar behavior with poetry install. So what did we do in my company? We realized that we should definitely change how we handle dependency management and ditch pip. And our best option back in the day was poetry. And at the moment, we are in the transition from pip to poetry. But so far with poetry, it's easier to update our dependencies. The end, I thought. But I realized there is a new dependency management tool, PDM, and it's created by Frost Ming. And Frost Ming is actually one of the core developers of pipenv. So he realized we don't actually need virtual environments for Python. We use virtual environments for to manage different projects in one machine, for example. Of course, you can still use them if you want to, but he wanted to follow this new PEP 507. Sorry, I'm really excited. 582, and it proposes to use packages folder to store the libraries, very similar to Node modules. So we don't need to use virtual environments. So this was a quite interesting topic, at least for me. But of course, if you want to use virtual environments with PDM, you still can. So it enforces, but you can also, if you want to choose to use with virtual environments, you can still use, which if the virtual environment is activated or if any of the following files existed, you can set to use it. And here's an interesting table because you can see first, let's check the clean cache. pipenv is quite a bit faster than poetry, but with cache, poetry is definitely faster than pipenv. But PDM is crashing in all columns. Like it's quite fast. I never tried it on my local, but I definitely want to after this. But keep in mind that PEP 582 is still in draft. So it's not accepted. It's still in draft since 2018. So it's kind of your choice at the moment if you want to go with that or not. But it's an interesting approach, I think. And if you want to read more about the topic, I gathered all of my research on here. I don't know if you will be able to reach the presentation, but I can give it to you. Okay, thanks for listening.
Okay, then now we have a QA round, so Uku, please don't leave. So now we have a Q&A session. If anyone online or attending in person have anything to ask Uku on today's topic, feel free to do so. I can start with my first one. Did you guys figure out like what are the 104 packages that you weren't aware of afterwards?
Yeah, we know all of them now.
Yeah.
But we don't have to deal with them now. So
That's perfect. Yeah, that's the point, right?
Yeah.
Okay, then, yeah. You can also ask your question on Slido if asking them in person is too awkward for you. And also for the online people as well, please join our Slido page and post your question there.
Wait, sorry.
Then, yeah, if there's no question, then we actually have a break until 8:10. And then we'll have another talk by Hima on GUIs are so cool. So don't miss out. Yay.
Okay, we are welcoming now Himalata. She will introduce us to the Qt project and why GUIs are so cool.
Hello everyone, I'm Hema. I'm joining you remotely today from Freiburg. I'm a junior embedded developer in MDEC Digital. It's a startup that focuses on medical device development and cloud connectivity. As an embedded developer, Python is not my day-to-day language, so I basically work with C. I happen to work with Python on a project creating a graphical user interface, and I liked how Python was able to interact with external peripherals and hardware in spite of being a high-level language. This is also a reason why I would like to present to you how creating a graphical user interface with Python works and how one can access external peripheral, for example, a serial communication port in your PC using Python. To step into the before stepping into the code, I would like to give an introduction on the setup as such, and I'm using a Windows 10 PC. I have Python pre-installed, so I'm not covering this part in my talk, and I'm only going to cover the part where I'm going to install a library that is going to be used in this program. The library that I'm going to use is called PyLadies, and it's fairly easy to install it both command prompt in a Windows PC. And after downloading PyQt5, one creates a .ui file using designer.exe file that present in the PyQt5 folder. Then we convert the .ui file to .py file using another executable file that's part of the PyQt5 tools. And then we execute the logic from the .py file that was created automatically, and the whole process is then taking place on the Visual Studio Code IDE. After connecting the logic between the graphical items, we finally run the logic.py file, which is our main file, and then we have our graphical user interface. I would like to give an introduction on the code that we execute on the command prompt. So I will list this information on readme.md, and this code is also later available on my GitHub, which a link provided wherever the video is placed later. So to install the PyQt file, one would use the pip install PyQt5 command on the command prompt. So I'm assuming pip package for Python installation is already in place. And to install the PyQt5 tools, one uses the given command here. And this is also where we then have our designer.exe file. So one can find it in the binary folder of the PyQt5 installation, and the .ui to .py conversion takes place over PyUIC5.exe, which is part of the PyQt5 tools folder. And this is important to know where these folders are placed, and it's not a problem if one doesn't know it firsthand. So all one has to do is type this command once again on the command prompt, and then the command prompt gives a notification saying that the requirement is already fulfilled and which folder the files are placed in. So we go into the installation a bit more deeper. I can now show you how the designer.exe application looks like and this is how it looks. Let's just create a dialog box from scratch. So I go to the new form creation and then I select one of the template options which has two buttons already in place. So I just click create, and once I click create, I have this dialog box open, and on the left side there are also many items that are available, like a text browser and a radio button which we'll be using, and the push button which one can see here. Then on the right side I have every detail regarding each item, and this is specific to the item. Let's say I choose a radio button, so one can see that the properties are changing according to the options I choose. And then I can, for example, show how one can customize it. Let's say I change the font of this one from 8 to 10, and one can see the change here. And let's say I change the style sheet of this one, and I change it from no color to turquoise. Oops, sorry for that. So I click background color, turquoise. Okay, so here you have the command, and now it's changed to turquoise. So one can customize every single option this way. Even the background color is changeable, and it's the similar process as before. I just changed the background to gray. So after creating such a GUI, one just has to save it, and then you can see that it's the .ui format. I'm not gonna save this one, but this is how the .ui file is created in the first place. And after saving, one can exit it, and we are back to our .ui file, and that's how you get the .ui file. To now convert it into .py file, one has to find the location of the pyuic5.exe file, and then place the UI file on this executable file or in the same folder as the executable file, and then run this command on the command prompt. And for example, if dialog.ui was my input file, then I output it as dialog.py. But in my case, I saved the dialog as guiqt.ui, and now I got a Python file called guiqt.py. And in this Python file, I have made some changes apart from what was already placed in the .ui file. It's fairly intuitive once one gets to play around a bit. So when we go to the guiqt.py, I can see that the file was created from guiqt.ui file, and the code generator that I used is of version 5.15.4. And it says that any changes made after the command to change it from .ui to .py cannot be reversed, and I also don't intend on reversing anything in this process. But while trying it out for the first time, it's always better to stick to the .ui to .py conversion. And when we take a rough look at this class here, we already have the necessary libraries imported into this file, and using that we create a class called UI dialog, and this is then declared as an object So I declared it as an object because I don't want to make any changes or create a logic upon this Python file. I want it to remain as the sort of .ui file where I don't want to have any business logic on. So I then moved the business logic to my logic.py file, and this just remains as the basic items profile where I have each of my items separately and none of them are interacting with each other in the first place. And the logic.py is the file where each element is coherently interacting with each other depending upon the specifications of my requirements. Okay, so if I move towards the end of this automate file, I can see that I have renamed my buttons to TD and then my function or the intention of the function, the name on the buttons, for example, and RVs between my radio buttons, and then it also spells as labels. So we are not going to make any change here, and I'm moving to the logic.py, and before I show GUI, as I said earlier, I want to interact with the external peripheral and existing communication port on my PC, and for this purpose,
Hello. We don't have any sound right now. We're very sorry. We're not entirely sure why, but we're gonna work on it. And then hope to see you later.
So folks, sorry about this. Hello, can you hear me? Hello. Hi, I hope everyone is able to hear me. So I'll voice over for this part of the video. And currently we are going through the GUI-Qt.py, and I was showing the child class, which is part of the GUI-Qt.py. And this will later be inherited to the GUI-Qt logic.py, which would be the parent class. And here we have some items, which are the GUI objects, and these are then accessed through the logic.py file. And one can see that there are a list of components that were shown in also in the designer.exe, and I have not used many of those. I have only used 3 of the elements, and these will also then be accessed in the logic.py file. So this basically would stay as a file that was converted from .ui to .py file. As I said earlier, it's once one gets to play around a bit, it's easier to make some changes, but it's harder to do it at the first go. One might be overwhelmed by the large amount of code, but it's only a visual play around. And here I have mentioned PB as a short form for push buttons, and I have a couple of them, and the names are given according to the name of the button itself. And then the RB stands for the radio buttons, and we have 3 radio buttons that are mimicking a wireless connectivity feature that is a dummy feature that I've set up on the GUI, and the actual logic and interaction would then be shown in the logic.py file. So here one can see that I have the parent class, which is my Windows serial, and this is being inherited from GUI Qt by importing the UI dialog class. I then access the push button and the radio buttons in the function shown below. Since I'm an embedded engineer, the interesting part for me was to access the external fediffril and also the internal fediffril available on my working PC. So I try to access my serial communication ports. For this, I use the import serial library. And then this will give me a list of ports available. And this is an inbuilt function of the library, so one doesn't have to worry too much about it. And this is also not going to change any of the current setup in your PC. with, so I now declared the Windows serial as my main function, and with all of the other functions are accessed via this. The only connecting factor between the GUI qt.py is the pyqt file library, which I also had to import here because I'm accessing the peripherals and it's not possible to do it without actually having the library functions in here. So if one fails to do that, then we end up in syntax error. From line 26 until 36, you can see that I tried to set up the UI and basically set some functions which can then give me a response based on whether I click the push buttons, unclick the push buttons, and also toggle the radio buttons. So when one goes through the code line 17 until 24, it's just a print over the console. It's just giving me some information like my name and the purpose of the code and the version of the code and the date of the code. So I will now start the program. And this is my GUI interface that I designed for the talk. And I have the PyLadies Berlin logo over the left corner, just to show what other possibilities exist apart from the designer.exe file. And the three parameters that I set here are the COM port from the import serial library that we saw earlier, and these are my dummy wireless functions that I set as features, and also a line edit text where I can input my command, which can then be sent over to the controller. Here one can see that I only now have two microcontrollers displayed, and the names of these are common. I set it up this way, and if I undo it, I can also access any other COM port or the communication port available on my PC. But when one tries to work with the microcontroller, it's fairly common that we connect to a couple of microcontrollers and don't want to tamper around with the default USB ports. This is the reason why I use only the Silicon Labs controller, and in line 47 of my code, I have said that the input string, I've only fetched the input string, which is the description in line 46. And from the description, I say the first 7 characters have to match the input string that I have fed in the line 8, which stands for silicon. And I only verify if this is true, and then I say accept the COM port. For the microcontroller itself, it doesn't matter what the description states. It only needs the number of the COM port, and the name itself is just for human observation, or for us to determine which one we want and which one we don't. And if I now comment the line which filters me the COM ports, I can now see that my GUI has also the default USB ports listed in the communication port, and I will just choose the one which I want now. That would be the Silicon Labs COM port 7. And if I try to connect now, please observe the console. So I try to give some outputs there, since these are only dummy functions and I'm not connecting anything to my microcontroller other than just the microcontroller to my PC. I only print out statements on my console depending on which item I choose. So the radio button, if I click Bluetooth now, one can see that the console prints activating Bluetooth connection. And this is also a real life scenario where one can have a set of commands written under this function, and it also executes accordingly. And in a command, I assume that I have a motor connected to my ESP module, and I set the RPM to 1500. and the microcontroller has now received this command. I can also change the command and re-enter it or re-input it. Or I can simply press clear. The function of the clear button is to just wipe out whatever one has typed in into the command box. This is easier to do when you have a long string of command, so one doesn't have to keep on pressing the backspace. When it comes to the push button, the difference between the push button and the radio button is that the radio button functions based on toggle and the push button functions based on click or unclick. I have not included unclick here. I've only used click connect. And with the start function, I have given the console output, assuming that my program is gonna progress 25% every 2 seconds. And at the end of the execution, I also try to print a successful symbol, which is similar to my PyLadies logo. So these are labels that I have put up externally other than the .ui file. So now I press start and one can see the progress of my command every 2 seconds. And after successful execution, I get a tick icon on my GUI. One can also, however, put up a progress bar that can make it easier to have the output on the GUI. But I did not do this for simplification purpose. It also makes it easier to do it when one has a external monitor, like a tiny touch screen that is the size of the GUI itself, so one doesn't have to use a mouse to roll it around and see the console output, which is annoying, since it's also, as you see, not so easy to do in a big monitor where I have to differentiate between the IDE and the GUI if I want to show something. So the GUI is essentially for an application where you don't have to have anything running on the background that you want to access while the GUI is running. And now I have showed all of the items and how they are interconnected to each other. So one can just go and press exit. So the exit function is now exiting the system. So this is the library that I also imported, and one doesn't have to move the GUI around in order to find the exit button. So this is my code for today. I've also attached a link. I hope there would be a link to the GitHub where one can try the code out, and I would also try to write some steps about its execution. And I'm sorry that I maybe should have checked the audio before I uploaded it. I would, however, do so in the future. And thank you for your patience. And please feel free to ask any questions regarding the technical aspects.
Can you hear me? Hi, Hema. Thank you very much for taking over, and we apologize for the technical problem. We don't know why, but we couldn't hear you here. And it was really impressive how you did this live audio to your video. It was like, wow. Okay, and we have some questions here for you. The first one is, what limitations, if any, have you faced with Qt library?
With the Qt library itself, for a simple application as this one, I did not face much of a limitation. but if one has to go through real-time application, then I would of course face problems. And one interesting point is that I'm in Nuremberg today for the Embedded Systems Conference, and there I got to visit the Qt booth, and there I got to know that the Qt people also provide customized solutions for customers. So which makes it easier to understand that the library itself is fairly simple to use, but once your program or your specification gets complicated, it's not gonna help trying stuff by yourself. So it's rather easier to get help from them, I would say.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, somebody's asking, where can I get the slides for the presentation?
For the slides of the presentation, I would post them on my GitHub link. I would pass over the link to the organizers, and I'm sure along with the video, when it's streamed, there would also be a link where one can access the code and also the presentation slides.
Oh, thank you. That would be great. Yeah, maybe you can post them on YouTube as well. How can we write tests best for this kind of code base?
For these kind of code base, what we do at work basically is to have visual tests, since we have applications that are more or less visually approved. Since we have simulations going on with hardware peripherals, we have a test protocol which we write based on the requirements by the customer, and we make sure that all the criteria are fulfilled by visual verification.
Okay. Well, there are many questions today. How does one deploy or package this code for users? I'm unfamiliar with this process.
Sure. This is a really interesting question because one doesn't want to hand over the Python file to the customer, because it's possible that if they don't know what they are doing, they might change something, and then it's not beneficial for both parties. And that's why there's a command that one can use in Windows over command prompt to convert the whole Python file into a .exe file. And this is what's usually delivered to the customer. So they only have to click on it like they would on any other Windows application, and it runs as usual. But one has to make sure that all the libraries and image folders are also part of this executable file.
Oh, okay. Okay, this was the last question. Okay. Thank you very much, Shema, and thank you very much for being so spontaneous. Like, we are really impressed. We're here, like 30 people in Berlin and people online. Thank you very much for being with us today. And I don't know if we have something else up. No. Okay, then thank you. Yeah. Have a good night.
Thank you, Hannah, for this link. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Jessica, and the organizers for helping with the whole process. And I had a really great time and adrenaline rush to come up with the talk. So thank you very much.
Thank you.